So now to our last speaker. Guy Standing is a labor economist, a former professor of development studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. He's a founder of Basic Income Earth Network, and he is the author of several books and reports, among them The Prokaryote, The New Dangerous Class, Plunder of the Commons, and most recently Blue Commons, all of which are in the library next to the arts installation. And Guy also bought a couple of copies if you want to purchase them. Guy Standing spoke at the conference in 2015, and we're super happy to have him back in Malmö. Please give a warm hand to Mr. Guy Standing.
Thank you very much. One of the problems of being the third speaker after two excellent speakers is you have a piece of paper at the end that looks a bit like this, because you've been given so many extra ideas that you've added them to what you had to say. And of course, being the outsider here, it's always difficult to know where to pitch to try to give value added to a conversation that's been going on internally and outside. And I've been sitting here looking out at this building site. And it reminded me of a theme that's in my new book, The Blue Commons, which is about the destruction of the sea. That one of the problems that is taking place in the sea around the world is the excavation of sea sand. Because you cannot build any building or road with sand from the desert. You have to take it from the sea for various reasons. And every year, they excavate 50 billion tons of sea sand to be used in the making of concrete. And in the last 3 years, China has excavated more sea sand than the United States did in the past 100 years. It's accelerating. Now, of course, if you excavate sea sand, you are destroying seashores. You're leading to situations where more and more, millions more, of people are living on land that is sinking, literally. And that's a sort of metaphor for where we are today in the existential crisis. And we've just had COP27. And if COP27 didn't make us all angry about the state of multilateral negotiations, then we're idiots, because it was a disgrace. And we're about to have COP15, which is in Montreal next month, which is talking about the loss of biodiversity and the ecosystems of the world. And it will be another circus mainly dominated by men who are all parading their talent for losing the essence of what it should all be about in prose that does a disgrace to the English language or any other language. Read the texts. It's disgraceful. So we are at a point where the ecological crisis is crashing towards us, and we've also got a social crisis. And that's what I think Martin wants me to talk about rather more than the Blue Commons, because it's about work. We are living in an era of what I call rentier capitalism. Rentier capitalism has emerged from the neoliberalism of the late 20th century to the point where now more and more of the income and wealth is flowing to the owners of property. Financial property, physical property, and so-called intellectual property. It's a structural thing that is not just measured in indexes, Gini coefficients of income distribution or wealth distribution. It's a structural capitalism dominated by finance, global finance. And one thing that is absolutely true about global finance, and particularly its modern variant of private equity, is they maximize short-term profits. Any defense of capitalism as somehow looking after the long term goes out of the window when you have finance in control. So we have a situation today where one company, BlackRock, owns and manages 20% of the world's stocks and has an algorithm, it's called Aladdin of all things, which is dominating about 40% of the world's shares. So imagine the capacity for herd instinct type of developments where when we have a crisis, they smile and make more billions. The system is such that systematically this process of rentier extraction is providing a context in which less and less income is available to those who perform labor. So that the share of income going to people who rely on labor has been going down all over the world. In China, in the United States, in Europe, everywhere. And this is going with the growth of the class structure, about which I've written various books, in which you have a plutocracy and an elite. It's not the 1%, it's the 0.01%. Then a salariat, still doing quite nicely, with their employment securities, their pensions, their paid leaves, etc., and a growing precariat. And the precariat is defined in 3 dimensions: distinctive relations of production, distinctive relations of distribution, and distinctive relations to the state. The first one is, of course, where every commentator concentrates, more and more millions of people are having to rely on unstable, insecure labor. We know that phenomenon, right? But it's not that alone. It's more importantly that millions of people don't have an occupational narrative to give to their lives. They don't feel they are developing themselves through what they're doing. And they don't have a corporate narrative or an agency narrative either. And this is the first mass class in history whose average level of education is higher than the level of labor they have to perform or can expect to perform. But more interestingly, analytically, is that if you're in the precariat, you have to do a hell of a lot of work for labor. Work for the state. Work to reproduce yourself. Work to reskill skills that have become obsolescent even before you completed the training for them. Work in waiting around. Work in completing tasks demanded by the state. You do it, or you won't get any benefits. You do it. You have to do it. And if you do that, rather than this, you're in trouble. This sense of losing control of time is what the precariat is all about. The second dimension is that if you're in the precariat, you can only expect to get money wages. Money wages that are falling in real value and becoming more and more volatile and uncertain. And this is the first mass class, substantial working class, if you like, that is systematically exploited through debt. Finance wants us all to be in debt, damn it. That's how they make their money. So you find that millions and millions of people now are living on the edge of unsustainable debt, where for every potential accident, bad decision, or whatever, you could be out in the street as a bag lady with all your belongings in 2 plastic bags. This phenomenon of debt extraction creates a situation or accentuates a situation where the people are living with contrived scarcity. In my own country, there are now 3,000 food banks where people are expected to go along and queue so that they can get a tin of baked beans or whatever it is in order to get them through the week. A modern economy, the 5th biggest in the world. We've got hundreds of hygiene banks, a concept that should be regarded as a dystopian, unrealistic possibility. A hygiene bank where women have to go along and queue to get free period problems dealt with. This should make us more than sick. It should make us want to go out in the street and do something about it. Now, this situation is going along with the third dimension. Because for the precariat, the primary protagonist is not the employer, the boss, as in the old days, but the state. It's the state that's creating the panopticon apparatus and the panopticon, denying you benefits, denying you rights. And so we see millions of people losing the rights of citizenship. Not just migrants. Many of us and our children are losing civil rights. They can't get access to justice. They're losing social rights. They cannot get access to benefits or services. They're losing cultural rights because they cannot participate in communities of common identity. And they're losing economic rights because they cannot do what they're qualified and able to do. And ultimately, they're losing political rights because they do not see in the political spectrum a party or an ideology that is representing their interests, their aspirations. I first came to Sweden back in the 1980s. And I worked, as I was telling our friends last night, with a great Swede, Rudolf Meidner. I loved the man. He was a fantastic economist. And he realized that the Swedish model of the post-war era had reached its limit. It was finishing. And we've had that since then. I wrote a little book about it at the time, in the late 1980s. And we had a situation now where the Social Democrats, not just of Sweden, but of Britain and elsewhere, have become the reactionary party. Because they want to put back laborism and the whole laborist welfare system. Swedish model, Bismarckian model, Beveridge model. And they're holding back a new type of progressive thinking around work and how we use our time. When I wrote The Prokaryote in 2011, which has been translated now into 25 languages and taken me all over the world, on page 1 I said, if the aspirations and interests of the Prokaryote are not dealt with, we will see a political monster. In 2016, of course, a lot of people contacted me and said, your monster has arrived. It arrived with Trump, and it arrived with Brexit, and it arrived with various other things, and it's continuing to enter the stage in Italy, in Sweden, in Britain, and so on. We are at a transformational moment where the atavistic part of the Prokaryote, the people who don't have a lot of education, are listening to the sirens of populism, promising to bring back yesterday, some glorious past, some Swedish nirvana, or British sovereignty, or whatever it might be. And these people are playing on the fears that Jenny mentioned, the fears that are deliberate, the fears that make people subservient to putting up with onerous labor conditions, onerous social conditions, because they're fearful. And we be just the same. So that luring by neo-fascist populists should be understood. We collectively have to offer a new politics of paradise in order to overcome that fearfulness. The second part of the Prokaryote are what I call nostalgics. These are the millions of people who've become migrants. A word that sort of conjures up all sorts of negative, pejorative things. I'm a migrant, damn it. Okay? Most of us have been backgrounds of migrants. But migrants have been villainized, demonized, and are losing rights. But they won't vote neo-fascist populist. They're disenfranchised. They keep their heads down. They keep their heads down. And every now and then there are days of rage, like around Stockholm a few years ago, you know, when arson breaks out, etc., because the tensions get too much. Then there's this third part of the Prokaryote. The part that I hope is represented amongst us, where we've got education. We're not going to vote for neo-fascist populists. We're not going to disenfranchise ourselves because we know that is defeatism. That is not an acceptable option. But we're looking for that politics of paradise still. So here I come to the question, the Lenin question. What is to be done? I've just completed the manuscript of a book called A Politics of Time. I think it's an appropriate conclusion to this set of books I've been writing. And it's about how do we go for an equality of time? Because time is very, very unequally distributed. If you're part of the salariat or elite, you have control of your time, you have plenty of time, you can do what you like. If you're down in the precariat, you have no control of time at all. You have to do whatever you have to do. And if you don't do it, you pay a price. You have no control of time. It's the biggest form of inequality that you could possibly imagine. Going back to Seneca, we were talking about last night. Time is the most precious of assets. And we need to start by thinking, how do we reconceptualize what we mean by work? The ancient Greeks made a very clear set of distinctions between labor, which was done by the slaves, the banosoi, the metics, but not by a citizen. Work, which was done with your relatives and your friends, in philia, civil friendship, which was praxis, and recreation, and what they called cholet, leisure, real leisure. Capitalism makes it clear, as far as they can get away with it, that the only things that matter are labor and consumption and recreation. Keep yourself ready to do more labor. We need to escape from that conceptualization and resurrect what I call commoning. Commoning goes with care. It is absolutely scandalous that in the measure of our national income, GDP, if a woman does care for another person's child and is paid for it, that contributes to GDP. If she looks after her own child, it doesn't get counted as work, and it's a deduction from GDP. It's absolutely sexist, it's crazy, and it diminishes our appreciation not just of conventional forms of care, but care for the community, volunteering, and commoning. If you look back historically, commoning was what the glue of society. It's what you did together, sharing in the public agora, in the sense of participating and learning. And it combined the beauty of self-realization with the beauty of linking up to nature. We need to revive that sense of commoning. And it's happening. Bits and pieces are developing. If I give you a small example, which I've mentioned in my book on the Blue Commons, which I happen to love because it's something that should have occurred to us many years ago. In Denmark, I don't know if we have any friends from Denmark here today, they now have sea allotments. Sea allotments in which they are giving allotments in bits of the sea to various people for growing seaweed, fish, shellfish, etc. Cleaning the water, etc. Very quickly, those communities have found that you can only do it productively and sustainably if you all pool your resources and share the activities. This sense of commoning is spreading with allotments, with permaculture, with various networks, with projects, with artists, communities. And we need a politics to go with that. We need a politics also which say, look at the way people are being forced to use their time. those activities where they're being forced to use their time, we should be finding ways to get rid of it. Take, if you're in the precariat, applying for jobs. Many people in the precariat have to apply for thousands of jobs, I mean it, before they get one interview. And what happens now increasingly with companies is they have algorithms to determine who gets to the point of being interviewed. So you apply, you say yes, well, yes, you'll be considered shortlisted. You're actually the 5,000th, but never mind. Then you have to do an aptitude test. Then you have to do some other test. Then you have to do another test. And the average on corporates is 6 rounds of these tests. 6 rounds. Think how much time that uses of someone. And they're doing it for hundreds of job applications. And if they don't in many countries, they have their benefits cut. This sort of thing may sound very small, but it is work. It's work for the state because the state is demanding it. Now, supposing we had a policy that companies, after the first round of applications, had to pay the person for their time in applying. I bet you their algorithms would improve in efficiency very quickly. It's the same with the application for benefits and sanctions, which of course is a big thing in my own country, but elsewhere too. If we said, okay, you're going to penalize someone who fraudulently demands a benefit, then you should pay a price if you deny that person a benefit when he actually or she actually should have received it. Make it symmetrical. There are all sorts of little things which could enable time to be saved. Same with waiting around. What's not appreciated is that if you're in the precariat, you have to spend an incredible amount of time waiting. Waiting. And if you don't, you'll miss that opportunity or you'll be penalized. So we have a situation where we need to think creatively. And that leads to my last point. I'm sure Martin would want me to stop, which is that I have advocated a basic income for more than 30 years. And in the early stages of the pandemic, I received a call from Massive Attack. And I thought it was a joke. And they asked me, would you do a video, musical video, on your ideas on basic income and the precariat? I genuinely did think they were really joking. But in the end, a friend of mine said, Guy, you've got to do it. So I did this video. It's now been seen by over 500,000 people in English and in various other languages, I don't know how many. And every day I get emails from people. Because they're saying basically how a basic income would enable them to change their lives. To have a little bit more control of their time. To have a little sense of social justice. To have a little freedom. But most importantly, to have basic security. Even if it's a modest level to start with, basic security which leads to mental health, which leads to a sense of being in control. And in the end, as we're seeing with pilots around the world, and I'm involved in one in Barcelona, one in Wales, one in Nepal at the moment, and I was involved in the Finnish one, and various others. We see that people use their basic income to pay down debts, to improve their health, to improve the nutrition of their children. And most importantly, in terms of Jenny's discourse in particular, it has an emancipatory effect for women. We have found that women benefit more from having a basic income than men. Men benefit as well. But it also enables women to move out of abusive relationships, to have a stronger bargaining position within households and outside households. It leads to a greater sense of dignity and, strangely enough, it leads to more work, not less. But the sort of work we would like to be doing ourselves. More commenting, more care, more sharing, more tolerance. And for me, this is a vital part of the new progressive politics of paradise. Thank you very much for listening.